Wanted to show you guys a little bit about a little bit of my routine getting it in and out the car. I think I mentioned in my previous video that I have two forms of transportation. I got the knee scooter for in and around the building and around the house, which is actually the easiest form of transportation. But every time I leave the building, I'm on crutches. So I would have loved to show y'all from my apartment, but since I clearly need both hands to operate crutches, that wasn't possible. So it's more of showing you guys a little bit of the routine now that I'm actually outside and in the car. Whew. I would typically, if I had a bigger car at least, I would definitely love to actually pack my knee scooter and use that as my transportation even when I go out. But since I drive a coupe, Porsche Boxster to be specific, Porsche Boxster Sport. Since I drive a coupe, that's not possible. This is a two-door sports car. It's definitely fun. Feels like more like a go-kart than anything. But obviously it's not the most convenient. I could actually probably pack my knee scooter in here, but when I think about the trouble that it may bring me compared to what it's worth, I just decided to stick with the crutches. Obviously safety first, so I'm just gonna buckle up before we get started. I've been writing all day. I always like to write, but unfortunately I tell myself I didn't have time. But now that my more physical hobbies have been taken away from me since I done tore my Achilles, I lean into the other hobbies, which is writing. I like to read too, podcasting. Podcasting is probably the biggest of my hobbies, honestly. I love listening to podcasts. I don't know, something about it is just soothing for me. I find myself listening to a lot of podcasts when I'm either working out, because even when I'm at the gym, I'm probably at the gym for like 2.5, 3 hours. So popping in a podcast or two is always the way to go. Some of my favorite podcasts, I would say The Pivot is definitely my number one favorite podcast. Those guys, Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, and Fred Taylor, those guys are amazing at what they do. Ryan is a wonderful speaker, very intelligent. He's definitely a beast at what he does. He was also a very underrated football player too. I grew up in that I guess that 2000 time frame. I was born in 93, so I was really raised by the 2000s, 2010s. And this was before football leagues actually changed. Now, hell, I was watching the who played last night? Was it Cowboys and Tennessee Titans? And one of the hits that Micah Parsons put on the quarterback Dobbs, although they didn't call roughing the passer, but obviously they be having these announcers jump in or these ex-ref jump in and, hey, what do you think about this hit? I think a roughing the passer should have been called here. That wasn't roughing the passer, bro. But obviously the game has changed. It's an offensive game now, which, what sells? Scoring touchdown sells instead of a 10-7 game, which is what I prefer. A high-scoring game to me means no defense, but they're penalizing these defensive players, so these guys got to keep money in their pocket, and they also got to find ways to be competitive on the field. So I'm sure it's probably hard from a defender. But anyways, talking about Ryan Clark and his career, I think he was very, very, very good at what he did. I think he's very underrated. I grew up in that era where defensive ran the league. So, I mean, safeties were big, but linebackers were huge. But I definitely loved the safety play. Ed Reed was amongst my favorite safeties. Troy Polamalu, Sean Taylor, Bob Sanders. These were amazing, amazing, amazing safeties. Ryan Clark was up there as well. LaRon Landry, wonderful safety, very underrated, very, very underrated safety. But my favorite safety of all time, really my favorite athlete of all time, is Brian Dawkins. I mean, I'm a diehard Eagles fan. My dog actually chewed this hat when he was younger and teething. But yeah, Brian Dawkins is my favorite football player of all time, favorite safety of all time. I mean, I grew up playing football, like, especially in my high school years when I played football. I wore the number 20 because of Brian Dawkins. My hands down favorite player of all time, not even close. But yeah, back to podcasting. I love watching the Pivot podcast. It sucks that the original cast had to break away from I Am Athlete, but I'm glad they were able to flourish. I used to love watching the I Am Athlete podcast. I'm not too sure if they even pod anymore. I've been searching for episodes. I haven't really seen them. If they are podcasting, I'm not sure they are as consistent as they once were. I know they were trying to find their footing in the podcasting world after the breakup. They had brought in some different guys that they were trying, and I think at some point they had landed on Pac-Man and Shady McCoy as like the two consistent hosts, which I love Shady. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm an Eagles fan, but I absolutely thought they had a jewel in Shady, and I still think they do, which is the reason why I don't know why they don't podcast anymore. I've been seeing Shady more on the commercial aspect of media now. I think I saw him with Miss Taylor, Jason Taylor's sister. I'm sorry for not remembering her name, but yeah, I saw them at a round table with a group of guys, so I'm guessing that's what he's doing, kind of discussing sports, which he's still hilarious, even in the more controlled commercial media space, which is actually not hard to do. I mean, it's not easy to do. The reason why that is like the controlled commercial media space, obviously they want to appeal to a particular audience, and not only do they want to appeal to a particular audience, but they have an image to uphold. Like what someone is saying on Fox Sports or NFL Network may not work for everyone else. So whereas like podcasting, people speak freely. Most of these podcasters are independent. A lot of them have sponsorships, which is much different because on a network, it's like, hey, this is the culture, adapt to the culture that we have. Whereas like sponsorship, you create the culture via podcasting, and people be like, hey, I do want to adopt this culture. By people, I mean the sponsors, like, hey, I do want to adopt this culture. So essentially the sponsors are working with the culture that you've already established, which is, to me, genuine media. At least the media that I appeal to the best. And with that, you can also pick up on those conversations as you please. Whereas like traditional media, you have to tune in for a particular second. And as I've heard these guys discuss traditional media, the time frame that they give them to get their thoughts and their ideas out there is just not suitable enough to get thoughts and ideas out there. I hear these guys talk about how It's always somebody screaming in their ear, letting them know, hey, wrap it up, your time is ending. So I don't know if they're giving them like 30, 45 seconds, minute and a half to speak their piece. I don't know what it is, but that kind of media, I don't know, it just doesn't seem genuine. But to hear those guys talk about it clearly, it is what it is. But yeah, so podcasting is definitely one of those hobbies which clearly hasn't strayed away from me, that didn't require any physical. So aside from podcasting, I like to ride bikes, man. I'm big into motorcycles. I haven't rode a bike in a while, honestly, even before my injury. Because typically when I'm riding motorcycles, I'm riding it temporarily as I sell it. I got into the buying and selling motorcycle game in 2019 while I was actually still in Tallahassee. And it's crazy because in 2019, when I was still living in Tallahassee, I was gifted a motorcycle. I was gifted a 250cc Kawasaki Ninja. I believe it was 2012. And it may have maybe 28,000 miles. But yeah, I was gifted that by one of the residents at our property. I won't name the name of the property, but I was gifted that by one of the residents at the property. So this property that I was working at the time, it was like notorious for like people leaving scooters behind after they moved out. It was notorious for, folks just like abandoned bikes. It was just notorious for like abandoned things. And I remember we were doing like a garage clean out for all these things that had been collecting dust for a while. And in doing that garage clean out, I had noticed the motorcycle via the owner, because I had saw the owner actually drive the motorcycle in and out of the building a few times. And even with that, I knew his lease had already ended. So unlike the other motorcycles, which we essentially had called, we essentially called the police first to run all those VINs, because I'm not sure if those bikes were abandoned because they were stolen, which out of like, let's say 5, I don't remember how many bikes, but let's say out of 5, there were like 2 or 3 that were actually truly stolen, whereas the other ones were abandoned. So we first called the police, and the police was able to contact the original owners and let them know that their bikes were retrieved. But the other bikes, they would call the owners, and the owners were like, well, I don't want it, kind of thing. So they was like, hey, you guys can have these, but these 3 we'll have to bring back to the owner. But anyways, this particular motorcycle, we didn't even bother to contact the police about, because I actually knew the guy. Well, I didn't know him, but I had seen him in passing, and I know that motorcycle belonged to him. So I actually called him personally, and I was like, hey, we're cleaning out the garage, and your bike is still here. I know your lease had ended and you're no longer living here, so we don't want to tow this bike, because we know towing can get expensive. Obviously, they charge you for the initial tow, which I think in Tallahassee was like $115, $130 or whatever it is. And not only do they charge you for the tow initially, but they charge you for every single day they actually house your bike, until it becomes way too expensive that the owners decide that, hey, it's not even worth getting, and these tow companies request the title or whatever the case may be. So to avoid all that, I contacted him personally, and he told me that the bike doesn't work, and he can get it towed, and we can get it towed. So I was kind of surprised by his response there. So I was like, as in, you don't want it? That was my response to him. He said, as in, you don't want it? He was like, well, it's a 250cc bike, and it doesn't work, or it doesn't start. It's not worth getting fixed, because the price of getting fixed is probably the price of the bike. So for me, it's not worth getting fixed. he asked me, do you want it? I mean, if you want it, you can have it. Then he described me. He was like, are you that guy, the black guy that works at the office? This, that, and the third. He described me to the T, which, I mean, obviously I'm giving you a synopsis. Just the black guy that works at the office is not totally describing me to the T, but this is just an abbreviated version of the story. But yeah, he described me to the T. It was like, yeah, that's me. He was like, yeah, you can have the bike, man. You've always been super cool, super nice to me. So if you want it, you can have it. And we can meet at a Publix, and I could sign over the title to you. Then he asked me, do I know how to ride a bike? And I was like, nah, never been on a motorcycle before. Don't know how to ride a bike. I was like, but if I'm getting a bike for free, I'll definitely learn, and I'll definitely, get it fixed. And he was like, yeah, I'll definitely just give it to you. He said I had a guy at my job that was interested in buying it for like $500, but he never made any serious traction towards it. And I'm not necessarily pressed about the money. So if you want it, I can just give it to you for the sake of just getting rid of it. So we met at a Publix like 2 days later or something like that. And he signed over the title to me. And let me backtrack a little bit. So originally when I first called him, he didn't answer. And although we had a real good relationship with the towing company, and he did not answer originally when we contacted him, I just had the towing company come pick up the bike. But when he finally called us back a few days later is when we had this conversation that I'm telling you all about. So by this time, when he told me that I can have the bike, the towing company had already picked up the bike and it was already in their possession. So with the towing company already picking up the bike and it already being in their possession, he actually signed over the title to me while it was at the tow yard, but we met at a Publix to do the transaction. Then I had to call the tow company back and be like, hey, the guy that owned this bike finally got back in contact with me, and in getting back in contact with me, he decided to give me a bike, but I know the bike is not working, and I also don't know how to ride the bike. So can you guys take it to a motorcycle mechanic for me? And it was like, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I know you, like I said, I had a pretty good relationship with the towing company, so they actually took it to a motorcycle shop for me. So in the meantime, I was actually looking up motorcycle shops, calling around, and I eventually found one, and we agreed on a motorcycle shop for them to take it to. And so the bike was at the motorcycle shop for a few days, and the guy or the guys at the shop called me back, letting me know that, hey, kind of giving me a quote to fix the bike. And he was like, hey, the carburetors need to be clean on the bike. It needs a few different things. You need a new chain. And he said, I gotta be honest with you, man, this bike is not even worth fixing, bro. He was like, at the end of the day, it's a 250cc. I'm not only being honest for your sake, but also for my sake as well, because I have a lot of other bikes that are, waiting to be fixed. And so, I don't want to waste your time, and I also want to make sure I'm using my time wisely as well. Then I just broke it to him. I was like, hey, I got this bike for free. So, what is the cost of fix? And he was like, well, the cost of fix is in the ballpark of like $1,100 just to get it, up and running. And even once we get it up and running, we may find some things that, is also bad with the bike that we obviously can't necessarily see without it running at the moment. So I was like, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and fix it. He was, no, before I gave him permission to fix it, I asked them, what is the value of the bike? They told me, I think, in the ballpark of like $1,700 or whatever. I was like, well, yeah, let's go ahead and fix it. If it's $1,100 for starters, let's go ahead and fix it. So they fixed it. They cleaned the carburetor. They got it running. Then they find out that the gas is bad in there, and they got to drain the gas and do some other things, some more mechanical things. So overall, when I So I approved that too. Overall, when I got the bike back, I was already like $1,400 in the hole. Which at the time, not only did I not know how to ride the bike, but it's $1,400 that I didn't expect to spend. So I was already $1,400 in the hole. And he gave me like an ETA of like 10 days, where the bike was going to be ready for pickup. So here I am. I got to pick up the bike in 10 days. And he almost pitched it to me like, hey, you definitely have to pick up the bike in 10 days. Like I said, I got a lot of bikes waiting right now. I just don't have the storage space for all these bikes. So we'll be done in about 10 days, as far as finally getting to your bike and, getting some of the initial parts that we had ordered in just so we can fix the bike. So now I had 10 days to learn how to ride a bike, because I didn't know anybody in particular who knew how to ride a motorcycle at the time that could bring it to my apartment at the time, right? So I signed up for motorcycle lessons. Not that weekend, but the weekend after, because I couldn't get in that weekend. And let's just say if we had this conversation on like a Thursday, I was trying to get it on like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's a 3-day motorcycle lesson over there in Tallahassee. So I wasn't able to get in that weekend, so I had to essentially get in the next weekend. And the next weekend, when I finally got in for the motorcycle lessons, I was betting on learning how to ride a bike that weekend and actually picking up the bike that Monday or something like that. But luckily, after they fixed the bike, my guy needed a little bit more time just to make sure that the parts that they had was the correct part. I guess the guy who was actually fixing the bike wasn't physically at the shop for like 2 or 3 days. So if he had quoted me like to pick up the bike on a Monday, I couldn't pick it up until like that Wednesday or Thursday. So that gave me a little bit more time. But nonetheless, I learned how to ride a bike the next weekend. I actually learned how to ride a bike on a Harley Davidson, like I forget what the CC was, but I remember the instructor saying it would be equivalent to like a 500 CC, because like Harleys and those kind of bikes, their CCs are a little different than sport bike CCs. At least how they calculate it are a little different. But so I remember actually getting the bike. Getting licensed or learning how to ride a bike. Then finally getting it added to my license, all before I actually pick up the bike. So when I finally picked up the bike, I was scared out of my mind. I mean, obviously I was no longer in a controlled environment learning how to ride a bike, and there was no longer an instructor there. So I was scared out of my mind. I picked up the bike, and at a red light, the bike stalled on me. Obviously, if anybody know anything about bikes stalling, it's usually because, the clutch, you're not familiar with the clutch to throttle ratio. So bike stall on me, obviously rookie mistake, and I got people honking at me as I'm having to ride at least 11 miles from the shop to my apartment. But luckily I was able to make it there safely, and I was able to, make it there securely. But yep, that's how I got my first bike, right? So how does that correlate with me actually getting into buying and selling bikes? So it didn't take me long for me to be comfortable with riding a motorcycle. So that 250cc motorcycle, like anyone else who's learning how to do something for the first time, I made it my priority to get on the bike every opportunity I got. At the time, my job was, let's say, like 3 or 4 miles away from my apartment. I was riding the bike to my job. And if anybody know about Tallahassee weather fluctuates. So it would be freezing, and I'm on the bike, freezing my tail off. Or it'd be hot as I don't know what, and I'm on the bike. So I got very comfortable riding the bike. I was riding it every opportunity that I had. And I rode the bike for about, I would say about 6 weeks before I'm like, man, I'm ready to upgrade. And in being ready to upgrade, I also familiarized myself with Facebook Marketplace during that time. So, in familiarizing myself with Facebook Marketplace, I also learned about different styles of bikes, different types of CCs in the sport bike world, 600 and 1,000 cc. During that time, I made some motorcycle friends through the academy. Through the academy, these guys had already been riding bikes, or whatever the case may be. They just allowed their license to expire, and they couldn't just renew it. They actually had to, re-get their license done. Or some of these guys had been riding their bikes the entire life, but just been riding illegally and never actually went the license route. So there were different type of guys that I met there. But anyways, I learned about CCs through the hand booklet that I had, through, people that I met as I learned how to ride bikes. And learning about the different CCs, I learned that, I don't want to use the word learn. For some reason, I felt like I was told that getting 1,000 cc bike makes more sense than to get a 600 cc bike. Reason being is because you're going to quickly get bored with a 600 cc bike. So for some random reason, I thought it was a good idea to go from a 250 cc Kawasaki bike to a 1,000 cc bike. So in being familiar or getting familiar with Facebook Marketplace during that time, those were the bikes that I was researching. And as I was researching it, although I wasn't confident about the jump, or didn't know better, is probably a better way to put it, I was looking at the price ranges, and I'm like, well, if people are selling like 200, if people are selling 600 cc bikes for 2,500, and I'm seeing some 1,000 cc bikes for as low as $2,000, $2,300, then why not go the 1,000 cc route? Now keep in mind, the bikes that I was searching at the time were like 2001, 2002, 2003 style of bike. So that's why those price ranges were what they were. So I finally landed on a dude out of Daytona, who I didn't know was out of Daytona, because I didn't even know enough about Marketplace to adjust searches. But anyways, the other thing that caught my attention is he was selling a 2001 Suzuki Gixxer 1000 for $2,000. And I didn't know anything about bikes. I didn't even know how to properly inspect bikes. So what I did is I contacted them. I was like, hey, I want to buy this bike. I'm interested in buying this bike. And let's meet. He sends me his address. I'm like, oh, damn, this guy's in Daytona. So now I have to figure out a way to get to Daytona to buy this bike from Tallahassee, Florida, which is about 4.5 hour ride. Now keep in mind, I don't know anybody who actually rides bikes, and I also am not confident enough to try to get somebody to give me a ride just so I could ride the bike 4 hours back. So the only thing that made sense to me is to haul the bike. Now at the time, I had a friend named Tommy who was actually a coworker. We worked at the same apartment building together. his license was suspended. So because his license was suspended, he couldn't drive, and he actually drove a Ford Explorer. Now, what attracted me to the Ford Explorer for this particular mission, if you would like to put it like that, is the fact that he actually had a hauler on the Ford Explorer, or actually had a place where you would put that hauler thing. I mean, I don't know the proper term, or it's slipping me right now. So my thinking is, hey, let me go to U-Haul. Let me actually, because he already had an adapter for the hauler and everything. Let me, get a motorcycle bed, or a motorcycle hauler or lift, or whatever they call the proper term is at U-Haul, just so I can go pick up this bike. Hell, he can't drive his car anyways, since his license is suspended. So, I would just be asking him to use it, and I'll put the gas in his car back, right? Because at the time, I was driving like an old school Jaguar. I was driving like an 04 Jaguar X-Type, and I didn't have that hauler adapter, to adapt anything to my car. So, came up with this brilliant idea, talked Tommy into it, and Tommy agreed. Then I actually reached back out to the guy who was selling the bike, and I was letting him know that, hey, I'll be able to come pick up the bike on this day. It's a 4-hour drive, so I'll be to you like 9 p.m. Now, keep in mind, my plans was to get off work, drive to go get the bike. I didn't think anything past that. I didn't think if I was going to sleep in the car, turn around, trip. I didn't think anything past that. I was just trying to get there and get the bike because I was just so excited about upgrading bikes. And I thought going to 1000cc made more financial sense, and it made more purchase sense. Why get a 600cc if I'm going to get bored with it quickly? So I get a U-Haul right when I get off work. I got off work about an hour earlier this day. I think I got off work like close to like 3:30, 3:45, 4:15, right around there. I get a U-Haul, and U-Haul won't rent me a motorcycle haul. And the reason why they won't is because on this particular make and model of the Ford Explorer, for this particular year that Tommy had, there was a recall on this kind of car. And because there was a recall on this car, for insurance purposes, they can't rent me a haul. So now I've already told this guy that I'm coming to pick up the car, not the car, but the motorcycle. He's waiting on me, and I can't get the haul. So I'm going back and forth with the people at U-Haul for like what seems like 30 minutes to 45 minutes. I'm trying to talk to different people there to see if anybody can override this crazy policy. Because, like I said, Tommy's car already had the adapter. It's just a matter of hooking it on and actually going. And they just were not budging. They were not budging. So I was like, bump it. I'm losing daylight. So I just started driving to Daytona. Now, what I'm getting ready to tell you guys is so crazy in so many different ways, right? So as I'm driving to Daytona, obviously I'm using my GPS to get to this guy's house. What Tommy forgot to tell me is that his charger port in his car is loose. Like, for example, like, I'll show you guys my charger port, right? So he had a charger port in his car just like this, And having this charger port in this car just like this, whenever I would like try to push it, because he had an Android and I had an iPhone, so I tried to switch my the charger piece, and I pushed it in the port, and the port actually went inside his I guess his console. So now I lost the port in his console. Like, I couldn't fish it out. I tried to pull over to do it. I couldn't fish it out. So now I have no access to the charger port. And I'm heading to Daytona. And my phone is on, I think, 30% at the time. But I'm using my GPS. So I figured that my battery will be drained either by the time I get 20 to 30 minutes out, or even closer. But I'm so determined to get this motorcycle, I said bump it. I'm ready to take whatever chances I need to take to go get this bike, because I no longer want to ride a 250cc bike. So I'm driving there, and just as predicted, the phone finally dies on me. But as it's dying, or right before it died, right when I noticed I was at a 2-3%, here I am trying to memorize the route ahead. By this time, it's pitch black, right? Keep in mind, I lost daylight messing with these people at U-Haul. I didn't hit the road till about 5:30, 4-hour drive. So I'm in the Daytona area at like 9:30 p.m. and this guy lives out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm trying to memorize the road ahead. I'm like, hey, I know I'm gonna need to be on this road for like 30 minutes, but I didn't even have the whereabout to see what areas that I need to turn in. So I'm just really trying to memorize the map. Hey, stay 8 miles on this road, or I'm trying to memorize that aspect of it. Clearly a bad idea. So my phone finally dies, and I literally had to pull into the nearest gas station, buy a charger, and try to hang out there and allow my phone to charge, because that's really the only way that I can have enough juice just to continue the trip, which actually worked out perfectly, because I ended up at the guy's house closer to like 11:30. But at some point, the guy thought that I was gonna bail on him because I stopped answering his text messages. So he thinks that I'm just not coming. So I finally get to the guy's house at like 11:30. The only thing I could think of is to stall. I didn't want to tell him about Tommy's car and how I don't have a charger port. So first thing I asked him is like, hey, do you have electricity? And I don't know why I asked him, do you have electricity? But he didn't even want me to go into his house. But luckily he lived at this like kind of like a community, and there was like an outdoor community laundry area where I was able to actually plug my phone in the corner at that community laundry room as we kind of talked. And as we were talking, I clearly showed him the money, so he knew that I was serious and I was here to buy. But he was like, are you with somebody? Like, he was so confused. And I was like, nah, I'm not with nobody. It's just me. But he's looking at the Ford Explorer. He's like, you heard about a bike, right? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how do you plan on getting it back if it's just you? Like, do you know somebody in the area? And I was like, no. So he goes, so what are we gonna do? So we decided to just stick the bike sideways in the Ford Explorer. So I put all Tommy's seats down, and literally he, myself, and his son jammed the bike on its side inside the Ford Explorer. Now, this bike was huge, but it fit. It fit. We pushed this bike so far up that it actually fit. And in doing so, I saw somebody random walking. And in doing so, I was jammed because I had to pull my seat up. I was jammed to the steering wheel, getting ready to drive back. But us trying to figure it out, or really me trying to stall, was able to get me to about 60%, 60% charge. Like got my phone to 60% charge, so it worked out perfectly. So he goes, hopefully nothing happens, because I'm not sure, how gas works, or when it runs on its side, or when the bike is laying on its side for that long. I'm not sure how that works, especially you got to drive to Tallahassee. That was the least of my worries. I'm just glad that I essentially figured this situation out, got the bike in the Ford Explorer, and I'm going back. So now I finally get in my car and heading back to Tallahassee. Now, by this time, it's like 12:30 in the morning. And this is the part that I didn't calculate for, but my adrenaline and my excitement overtook my tiredness. So I had enough charge, my GPS is working perfectly, and I made it all the way back to Tallahassee. I don't think I made it back to Tallahassee until about 5 o'clock though, because I had to stop and get gas. But I made it back to Tallahassee. My car was parked at the complex, which Tommy was also living at the time. And I took my car to my apartment, leaving the bike in Tommy's Ford. I took my car back to my apartment, took a cat nap, honestly, showered and went into work, and I had the maintenance guys there help me take the car out, the motorcycle out once they got in. And during our time taking the motorcycle out, we broke the not the kickstand, but the rest, the footrest that you typically have when you're shifting gears. So the bike was laying on its left side, so we broke that. So I was able to order that part off Amazon, and got that within like 4 or 5 days, fixed it. Now I had a 1,000cc motorcycle. Here's where it gets interesting. So even at the time that I bought the bike, obviously I couldn't ride it for another 4 days or so. Bought a 1,000cc motorcycle. Hadn't been able to test ride it because that stand was not in, or was broken at the time. And when I finally got it in, fixed it, and I was able to get it going, the power difference from a 250cc motorcycle to a 1,000cc motorcycle, as crazy as it sounds, was the only thing that I clearly didn't account for. Brothers and sisters. Now, keep in mind, the bike was at the apartment complex at this time, so I had been driving to and from work, even, and waiting for the new part to get in. But once I finally got the new part in and fixed it at the apartment complex, that was the first time that I drove the bike home. And when I tell you I almost died, I almost died. The throttle, I didn't even feel like I was moving my wrists, and I was getting whiplash because that throttle, the power was just so so great. And I was just like, this ain't it. This is not it. So I tried that for like 2-3 days, same thing. You know, every time I had an opportunity, I would ride the bike. So I tried that for like 2-3 days. And I'm like, yo, I found myself at like 60 in first gear, which was vastly different than the 250cc. And I had to really come to terms with myself. I'm like, yo, if I don't give this bike up or if I don't sell this bike, I'm gonna die. Because I couldn't control it. One, it was way bigger, so I couldn't move it like I was moving the 250cc bike. And two, it was just too much power. So given the fact that I couldn't control it and the power was so great, it was only a matter of time before I crashed it or actually lost my life. So I decided to put that bike up for sale. By this point, it was the 7th day of having it. First 4 days, I was waiting on the part because I couldn't ride it. The other 3 days were just me testing it out. I put it up for sale for a ridiculous number because in my mind, I was really trying to justify or reason with myself not selling it. So although I bought it for $2,000, I put it up for sale for like $4,100. Because I'm like, there's no one gonna buy it for that much. So I just really wanted to kind of get the balls, really, just to stay on it and get used to it. But a guy hit me up the same day as I put it up for sale. He asked me to meet him. At the time, we met at a Winn-Dixie local, which was within a walking distance of my apartment. We met at Winn-Dixie. He was there with his son, and he was like, "There she go." Country guy, he a real cool dude. There she goes. He sees the bike, and he was like, then we started having small talk, and then he was like, "I got a bike just like this." I let my son ride it. He went over a speed bump, about 60 miles an hour, cracked the engine, and she was done for. So he was essentially telling me that he has the same bike at home, which he absolutely loved, but the engine blew because of his son going over that speed bump, cracking it, and the oil just essentially leaking out. But he didn't realize that there was an oil leak until he finally gets home. But by that time, it was too late. The engine had already blown. So for him, getting the same exact bike was sentimental, but it also made sense because he essentially had a parts bike already at home. So right then and there, he offered me a price. He said, would you be willing to take $3,500 for the bike? Of course, I couldn't sound too excited, but in my mind, I'm like, $3,500? I bought this bad boy for $2,000. And I had it up for sale for hours, and this guy already met up with me and offered me a $1,500 profit. I couldn't sound excited, so I was like, 37 is the lowest I'd go. Trying to negotiate, knowing good and well I wouldn't let that 3,500 walk. I said 37 is the lowest I would go. Then he goes, I can't do 37. 35 is me scraping up all my savings, man. All I got for you is $3,500, man. And I was like, all right, cool, man, $3,500. He was like, I'm not ready to take it today, but I'll be ready to take it in a few days here. And he was like, give me by this weekend, and we can meet up at the same spot, and I'll take it. And since I actually didn't want to walk home, I actually had him meet me at my apartment in a few days, and he bought the bike. He bought the bike $3,500 cash. And at that time, the Meek Mill song Dreams and Nightmares had just really became big too. So that line from that song had me feeling like a dope boy when he first touched that brick was so real to me. And right then and there, I knew I had something. And ever since then, I started buying and selling motorcycles. I bought motorcycles anywhere from 600cc, 1000cc, and I got super comfortable riding these bikes because I knew I was only gonna have them for a period of time. And I really learned the business of motorcycles too. And since 2019, from a private perspective, I may have bought and sold anywhere between 50 and 75 motorcycles, which don't seem like a lot, but when you're doing everything on your own, you're learning about the bikes, and you're flipping them like that's big. You know, I got super close to the motorcycle community in Tallahassee at the time. I moved down to Miami because Miami is consistently riding season. So I moved down to Miami because the weather is always nice down here. And one of the first things that I did when I moved down here is I fasted. I went on like a 21-day prayer and fasting, which Transformation Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma, led by Pastor Mike Todd. That's something they do at the beginning of each year. And I moved down here December 2019. So I joined in on that 21-day prayer and fasting, and you know, that took off for me ever since then. And yeah, I was buying and selling all kinds of bikes. Most importantly, I was protected while I was doing all these deals. Never have I, you know, done shady business. I was kept by what I feel like is the grace of God riding these bikes. Because oftentimes when I buy these bikes, I don't even know what's wrong with them, honestly. Because I'll do a visual test, which clearly improved over time as I've been able to get on bikes, get a feel for them, do my own research, and, you know, try to evaluate it to the best of my ability. But for the most part, I really didn't know the heart of these bikes, yet I was driving them great distances. Sometimes I drove bikes an hour after buying them. So I drove bikes great distances, not knowing what was wrong with it. I was only on 2 wheels. And with traffic being as bad as it is, especially in Miami. And yeah, that motorcycle company really became a good thing for me, really became lucrative. So that's how I got into buying and selling bikes. But nonetheless, I'm at the post office right now, so this will just be my post for today. Buying and selling bikes, how I got into it. Oh, I also got to give a shout out to SRK Cycles. When I was going through my 21-day of prayer and fasting, those are the guys, and I think they're located out of Philadelphia. I actually have not watched too much of their videos on YouTube since, but those guys taught me a lot about bikes too. Like, man, when I was fasting, when I tell you those guys kept on coming up on my YouTube feed, and it was almost like God saying, here, learn from these guys. And these guys were, you know, Christians too, because they would always start off a video by doing the scripture. And it was so cool. It was so cool. I learned a lot from those guys too, about bikes, about bike parts, about certain things that could be wrong with certain bikes. And I mean, they actually didn't do too many sport bikes. They did a lot of cruisers and a lot of touring bikes, but essentially for the majority, the majority of the time, these bikes have the same components. So same thing. But yeah, I learned a lot from those guys. I definitely got to give them a shout out. But yeah, that's how I got into buying and selling bikes. So that's it for this channel. I'm actually at the post office right now, getting ready to check my P.O. box. I'll tune in with you next time. About to go get some lunch after I get done with this. But yeah, I really just wanted to show you guys how I maneuver, get in and out of the car. Shout out to Tallahassee, Florida. Got my start there. Shout out to the FAMU Rattlers, my alma mater. Shout out to SRK Cycles. Most importantly, shout out to the grace of God for always covering me. You know, when I first got started, and as I still, you know, indulge in my side hustle, you know, after I recover. So that's it for the day. Checking out.